The voicemail hit my phone at exactly 7:43 on December 20th. My mother's voice, cold as winter steel, cut through the speaker with surgical precision. Hugo, we've all discussed this thoroughly, and we've reached a unanimous decision. You're simply not welcome at Christmas this year. Your behavior and your financial situation have become too much of a burden for this family to handle during what should be our most joyful time together. The message continued for another minute, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Standing in my empty Manhattan apartment, still wearing my Goldman Sachs suit from another 14-hour workday, I held that phone and realized something my family had no clue about. For 3 years, I had been the invisible foundation keeping their perfect suburban dream alive, paying every single bill that maintained their pristine Westchester County lifestyle. The devastating truth about my family's Christmas betrayal unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly funding their entire existence since my father Frank's landscaping business collapsed 3 years earlier. Every month without fail, I transferred exactly $3,427 from my analyst salary at Goldman Sachs to cover their $1,560 mortgage utilities that averaged $400 monthly property taxes, insurance premiums, and even their ridiculous country club membership that cost them $300 every month. Frank had been telling everyone that his new consulting work was keeping them afloat, maintaining his pride, while I quietly ensured they never missed a payment. I set up automatic transfers and managed their accounts remotely, letting him believe his fictional success story was real. My mother bragged to neighbors about Frank's business acumen, never suspecting that her son's Wall Street career was the actual source of their financial stability. But the crushing revelation came through pure accident. While scrolling through Instagram that evening, I stumbled across my younger sister Emma's latest post. There was a family photo taken in their dining room showing everyone gathered around their expensive mahogany table, everyone except me. Sitting in my usual spot was Sarah, my girlfriend, who had broken up with me just 5 weeks ago, claiming I was obsessed with money and secretive about finances. The caption read, "So excited Sarah's joining us for Christmas, she's basically family already." My hands trembled as I called Emma immediately. Her cheerful voice answered on the second ring, completely oblivious to the bomb she was about to drop on my world. "Emma, what's Sarah doing in that family photo?" "Oh, she's been coming to Sunday dinner since you two broke up. Mom and Dad absolutely adore her. She's been telling us all about your money problems and how worried she is about you. We had no idea you were struggling so much financially, Hugo. Sarah says you're too proud to ask for help, but we want you to know we're here for you." The room started spinning as Emma continued talking. Sarah had been poisoning my family against me for over a month, painting a picture of financial instability, while sitting at the very table that my money had purchased, eating food bought with my credit cards in a house whose mortgage I paid religiously every single month. "She's such a sweetheart, Hugo. Last Sunday, she brought Mom those expensive orchids you could never afford, and she insisted on paying for everyone's dinner when we went to that new steakhouse. She keeps saying she wishes she could help you more, but you won't let her. Mom actually cried after Sarah left, talking about how she raised such a stubborn son who won't accept help from people who love him." The twisted irony was suffocating. Sarah was using my own family's gratitude against me, positioning herself as their generous savior, while simultaneously destroying my reputation. She was spending money freely, probably from savings she had built up while dating me and never paying for anything, while convincing my parents that I was the one with financial problems. "Emma, did Sarah say anything specific about my supposed money troubles?" "Well, she mentioned you've been asking her for loans pretty frequently and she's worried you might have a gambling problem or something. She showed Mom some texts where you were apparently asking for help with rent money. Mom was so upset, Hugo. She said she never realized how bad things had gotten for you. Those texts never existed. Sarah was fabricating evidence, creating a complete fiction about my financial status, while enjoying the very lifestyle my hard work provided. My family was rejecting me for being poor, while living entirely off my wealth, believing lies told by someone who had never contributed a single dollar to their household, but was now being treated like a beloved daughter. I hung up the phone and stared at my computer screen, where my online banking portal showed automatic payments scheduled for the next morning. The mortgage payment, the utility bills, the credit card payments that covered their groceries and gas, even the premium cable package that let them watch their beloved sports channels. Every single financial obligation that kept their world functioning was connected to my accounts controlled by passwords only I knew. The cursor hovered over the account management page as the full scope of their betrayal crystallized in my mind. They were celebrating their decision to exclude me, while completely dependent on my financial support, having no idea that their comfortable existence was about to crumble. Sleep was impossible that night. By 3 a.m, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, driven by a compulsion to understand exactly how deep this betrayal ran. I knew all of my father's passwords because I had set up their online accounts when they were struggling with technology 3 years ago. What I discovered in his email inbox made my stomach drop to the floor. The planning for their Christmas celebration had been underway for weeks. Detailed email chains between my mother and various vendors revealed an elaborate party scheduled for Christmas Eve. 60 guests had been invited to celebrate what they called new beginnings at the family home. The catering bill alone was $9,000 for premium holiday fare from Westchester's most exclusive restaurant. Premium bar service added another $3,000. Professional decorations, table linens, and a live piano player brought the total cost to over $15,000. Every single expense was being charged to credit cards that I paid off monthly. My parents had been planning the most expensive party in their lives, funded entirely by my money, to celebrate cutting me out of their family. The email subject lines told the story, "Christmas without drama. Finally free to celebrate. Our independence party." They were literally throwing a party to commemorate my exile, using my financial resources to pay for their joy. But the most devastating discovery was buried in an email thread between my mother and father from 2 weeks earlier. The subject line read, "Sarah's information about Hugo." "Frank, I'm so relieved Sarah told us the truth about Hugo's situation. I had no idea our son had fallen so far. She showed me bank statements proving he's been borrowing money from her for months. The gambling addiction explains everything. Why he's been so secretive, why he never has money when we go to dinner, why he declined to help us with that refrigerator repair last month. I actually feel guilty now for not recognizing the signs sooner." My hands clenched into fists as I read my mother's words. I had declined to directly pay for their refrigerator repair because I was already secretly paying their entire mortgage and wanted them to maintain some sense of independence. Sarah had twisted that single moment into evidence of my supposed poverty. The email continued. Sarah suggested we take a tough love approach. She says enabling him by including him in family celebrations will only make his problems worse. The Christmas party can be our way of showing him what he's missing when he gets his life back together. We're not abandoning him. We're motivating him to change. My father's response was even worse. "You're absolutely right, Helen. Sarah has been such a blessing helping us understand Hugo's issues. I never thought I'd be grateful for a breakup. But she's saved us from years of financial manipulation. The party will be perfect. A celebration of our family's new chapter without the stress and drama Hugo brings to everything." I scrolled through weeks of emails documenting their party planning, guest list management, and budget discussions. They had invited extended family members, neighborhood friends, work colleagues, even my old high school teachers. Everyone was being told this was a celebration of the family's newfound prosperity and independence. The guest list included people who had known me my entire life, people who would ask where I was, people who would hear whatever story my parents had prepared to explain my absence. My reputation in our community was about to be destroyed by lies, while I sat alone in my apartment funding their celebration. As dawn broke over Manhattan, I discovered the final piece of their betrayal. Hidden in my father's sent mail was a shopping confirmation from December 18th. They had gone on a massive spending spree at the local mall, charging over $4,000 to my credit cards for new outfits for the party, expensive gifts for their guests, and home decorations. The email receipt showed purchases from Nordstrom Williams Sonoma, and even Tiffany for jewelry my mother wanted to wear to her party. They were literally shopping with my money to look successful, while celebrating my removal from their lives. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They believed they were independent and thriving, while being completely financially dependent on the son they were rejecting. I closed the laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline as early commuters began filling the streets below. My family had created an elaborate fantasy where I was the problem, where Sarah was their savior, where their party would mark their liberation from my supposed failures. They had no idea that their entire world was built on my sacrifice, and they were about to learn exactly how dependent they had become on the son they no longer wanted. The next morning, December 21st, brought a discovery that transformed my heartbreak into pure rage. While checking my work email before heading to the office, I noticed an unusual message in my supervisor's inbox. Visible through our company's shared calendar system, when checking for meeting conflicts. The subject line made my blood run cold: concerns about employee Hugo Martinez. Request for meeting. Using my access to the company directory, I traced the email's source. My parents had somehow obtained my supervisor's direct contact information and had sent him a formal complaint about my supposed misconduct. The timestamp showed it was sent 3 days ago, meaning it had been sitting in Michael Chen's inbox, while I worked completely unaware that my career was under attack. I couldn't access the email's content from my position, but the implications were terrifying. My parents were actively trying to destroy my professional life based on Sarah's lies about my financial behavior. Michael hadn't mentioned anything to me, which meant he was either ignoring the email or investigating quietly before taking action. The realization that Sarah had orchestrated this level of sabotage was breathtaking. She had provided my parents with inside information about my workplace, my supervisor's name, and probably suggested exactly what accusations would be most damaging to a financial analyst's career. She knew that any suggestion of personal financial instability could cost me my security clearance and my position at one of Wall Street's most prestigious firms. That evening, I took a different approach to understanding Sarah's campaign against me. I created a fake social media account and began investigating what our mutual friends were saying about our breakup. The results were devastating. Sarah had been systematically poisoning our entire social circle with carefully crafted lies about my character and stability. Through screenshots and saved conversations, I discovered she had been telling people that I was mentally unstable and financially abusive. During our relationship, she claimed I had been controlling her spending, monitoring her purchases, and becoming obsessively jealous about her independence. Friends who had known me for years were apparently nodding sympathetically as Sarah painted me as a manipulative partner they needed to avoid. The most damaging story she was spreading involved a complete fabrication about me stealing money from her purse during a dinner party at mutual friend's house. According to her version, I had taken cash from her wallet when she went to the bathroom, and she only discovered it later when she couldn't pay for parking. She told people she was too embarrassed to confront me directly, but that it confirmed her suspicions about my desperate financial situation. This explained why several friends had been avoiding my calls and declining invitations to meet for drinks over the past month. My social network was disappearing based on lies, while Sarah positioned herself as the victim of my alleged misconduct. She was isolating me professionally, socially, and now familially with surgical precision. But the worst discovery came when I accessed my credit monitoring service that evening. My parents had attempted to apply for a second mortgage on their house using fabricated income statements. The application had been submitted 2 weeks ago and was currently under review. They were trying to borrow against the equity of a home whose mortgage I was paying using false income information to qualify for a loan they planned to use for additional luxury spending. The loan application listed Frank's annual income as $85,000 from landscape consulting services. Pure fiction, since his business had been defunct for 3 years. They had forged tax documents and bank statements to support their claim committing fraud to access money they planned to spend on their fantasy lifestyle. When the loan was rejected due to discrepancies in their documentation, they had immediately applied to a second lender. The rejections were piling up, but they kept trying different institutions, convinced that eventually someone would approve their fraudulent application. The pattern was becoming clear. My parents weren't just stealing my money for current expenses, they were planning to leverage their theft into even greater financial exploitation. They saw the house I was paying for as an asset they could borrow against multiplying their ability to spend money they hadn't earned. As I sat in my apartment that night, the full scope of the conspiracy became apparent. Sarah had identified my family as vulnerabilities she could exploit, fed them carefully, crafted lies about my character and finances, turned them against me, emotionally encouraged them to exclude me from family celebrations, and was now pushing them toward financial fraud to fund their independence from me. I was being systematically destroyed by people who claimed to love me using weapons forged from my own generosity and trust. The Christmas party they were planning wasn't just a celebration, it was the final stage of my complete social, professional, and familial annihilation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "Hope you're getting the help you need, Hugo. Sarah says there are really good programs for people with gambling problems. We're all rooting for you to get better." I stared at that message for a long time, understanding that tomorrow I would begin the process of teaching them exactly how much they had taken for granted. They wanted independence from me. They were about to discover what independence actually meant. December 23rd arrived gray and bitter, with snow threatening in the forecast. I woke before dawn, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad covered in account numbers, phone numbers, and carefully planned talking points. Today would be the day my family learned the true cost of their betrayal. I began with the mortgage company. After navigating through automated systems using my account holder privileges, I reached a customer service representative named Jennifer, who confirmed my identity through security questions only I could answer. "I need to place an immediate payment suspension on this account due to suspected fraudulent activity," I explained calmly. "Someone has been making unauthorized use of my payment method." Jennifer's voice was sympathetic and professional. "I understand completely, Mr. Martinez. We can reverse the December payment that processed yesterday and place a hold on all future automatic payments pending investigation. You'll need to contact us again to reestablish payment authorization." "Wait, that's exactly what I need. Please reverse the $1,560 payment immediately and require written authorization before accepting any future payments." The mortgage reversal was completed within minutes. 3 years of perfect payment history eliminated with a single phone call. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness as I moved to the next item on my list. The electric company was equally cooperative. After explaining that unauthorized parties had been benefiting from my payment arrangements, they agreed to disconnect service pending verification of account ownership. The gas company followed the same protocol. Water and sewer services were suspended. Internet and cable television disappeared with another phone call. Each cancellation felt like pulling a thread in a carefully woven tapestry. For 3 years, I had been the invisible hand maintaining their comfortable world. Now I was systematically unraveling everything I had built for them, one utility at a time. But the most devastating discovery came when I checked my bank account that afternoon. Goldman Sachs had deposited my annual bonus early as a holiday gift to employees. $40,000 that represented months of overtime successful trades and exceptional performance reviews. The deposit had arrived on December 22nd, and I should have felt proud and accomplished. Instead, I felt nauseated as I traced where that money had gone. Somehow, through methods, I couldn't immediately understand my parents had accessed my bonus payment. Bank records showed a cash withdrawal of $35,000 made the same day the deposit arrived. They had taken nearly my entire annual bonus without my knowledge or permission. Frantic calls to my bank's fraud department revealed the shocking truth. Sarah had been listed as an emergency contact on my account from when we were dating. Using social engineering tactics and inside knowledge about my account details, she had convinced a bank representative that I was traveling internationally and had requested emergency fund access for my parents due to a family crisis. The bank representative, following protocol for emergency situations, had provided my parents with temporary access to withdraw funds. The withdrawal was technically legal, since Sarah had provided correct personal information and account details that only someone with intimate knowledge of my finances could possess. Sarah had been planning this heist for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment when maximum funds would be available. My Christmas bonus was supposed to be the foundation for the house down payment. I was considering the emergency fund that would secure my future independence. Instead, it had become the bankroll for my family's betrayal celebration and Sarah's escape plan. Private investigator receipts buried in my father's email revealed where some of that money had gone. They had hired Westchester Investigative Services for $5,000 to compile evidence of my supposed financial crimes and unstable behavior. A professional investigator had been following me for weeks, photographing my apartment building, my workplace, even my lunch meetings with colleagues. The investigative report, when I finally accessed it through the PI's poorly secured email system, was a masterpiece of twisted interpretation. Normal activities were presented as evidence of criminal behavior. My regular work schedule was described as erratic and suspicious. My modest lifestyle was characterized as attempting to hide assets. My lunch meetings were labeled as potential money laundering contacts. Sarah and my father had been building a case to have me arrested for financial crimes I had never committed, using my own money to fund their investigation planning, to present their evidence to authorities immediately after Christmas. The bonus money was their escape fund. They intended to destroy my life and disappear with my savings. Hotel receipts scattered throughout the evidence showed the most nauseating truth. Sarah had been sleeping with my father for months. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, all funded by my Christmas bonus while they planned my destruction. The affair wasn't just personal betrayal, it was criminal conspiracy funded by stolen money. As evening approached on December 23rd, I made the final call on my list. The catering company answered cheerfully, excited about their biggest order of the holiday season. "This is Hugo Martinez calling about the Christmas Eve catering order for the Frank Martinez residence. I need to cancel the $9,000 service immediately." "Sir, that's a very large order scheduled for tomorrow. We've already prepared most of the food and hired additional staff. There would normally be significant cancellation fees for such short notice." "I understand, but I'm the credit card holder for this order, and I'm reporting this as an unauthorized charge. The people who placed this order do not have permission to use my payment method." The cancellation was processed at 11:47 p.m. on December 23rd. Somewhere in Westchester County, my family was sleeping peacefully in their warm house, planning to wake up to the social triumph of their elaborate party. They had no idea that tomorrow would bring the complete collapse of their carefully constructed fantasy. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., wanting to be awake when their world began falling apart. Justice wasn't just coming for them. It was being delivered with the same systematic precision they had used to plan my destruction. Christmas Eve morning arrived with the brutal clarity of a New York winter dawn. By 7 a.m., my phone had started buzzing with the first panicked call. Emma's voice was shrill with confusion and fear as she tried to understand why their house had become uninhabitable overnight. Hugo, something terrible is happening here. The power went out sometime during the night and the heat stopped working. Mom tried to take a shower, but there's no hot water. Actually, there's no water at all. The pipes in the basement are making these horrible groaning sounds, and Dad thinks they might be freezing. Can you call someone? Do you know any emergency repair people? The temperature outside was hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and their house was rapidly becoming an icebox. Without heat or electricity, the beautiful suburban home they were so proud of was transforming into an expensive freezer. I felt a moment of concern for their physical safety before remembering the $35,000 they had stolen from my bonus just 2 days earlier. Emma, have you tried calling the utility companies? Maybe there's an outage in your area. Dad's been on the phone with them for an hour. They keep saying our accounts are suspended for non-payment, but that's impossible. Dad always pays the bills on time. They must have made some kind of mistake with their computer system. The beautiful irony of her words wasn't lost on me. Frank always paid the bills on time because I had been paying them automatically for 3 years. Now that I had stopped, he was discovering exactly how expensive his independence would be. By 9 a.m., the catering trucks had arrived at their house for setup. I could picture the scene based on Emma's increasingly frantic phone calls, professional caterers expecting to transform their home into a party venue, only to find a dark, freezing house with no running water and no electricity to power their equipment. The catering people are really upset, Hugo. They're saying their payment was declined and they need $9,000 in cash or a valid credit card before they'll unload any food. Dad's card isn't working, and Mom's card was declined too. They said if we can't pay immediately, they're taking everything back to their facility. The party starts in 6 hours and we have 60 people coming. The desperation in Emma's voice was escalating with each call. By 10:30, she reported that the caterers were loading food back into their trucks, while my parents stood in their driveway frantically calling credit card companies and banks to understand why every payment method was being rejected. But the real chaos began when guests started arriving early. Despite the obvious problems with the house, people had been invited to a celebration, and they came expecting warmth food and holiday cheer. Instead, they found my parents trying to explain increasingly impossible technical difficulties while their breath formed clouds in the frigid air. My Uncle David, my father's older brother and a retired police detective, arrived at 4 p.m. with his wife, Carol. Emma's final call of the day described the scene that was waiting for me when I decided to make my appearance. Hugo, Uncle David is asking really pointed questions about our finances, and Dad can't answer them. People are standing around in their coats because it's so cold inside, and someone brought flashlights because it's getting dark. Mom is crying in the kitchen, and some of the neighbors are starting to leave because there's no food and no heat. David wants to know where you are and why you're not here helping with the family emergency. At 5:15, I parked across the street from my childhood home and watched the surreal scene unfolding in the driveway. 60 people were milling around a dark house, their expensive party clothes looking absurd as they shivered in the winter air. Some guests were leaving immediately upon realizing the extent of the problem, while others were staying out of curiosity or concern for my parents' welfare. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching my father try to maintain his dignity while explaining technical problems that didn't exist to relatives who were beginning to suspect deeper issues. My mother was moving between groups of guests, offering increasingly desperate excuses about temporary difficulties and promising that everything would be resolved soon. Finally, I stepped out of my car and walked up the driveway carrying my laptop bag and a folder containing 3 years of financial records. Every conversation stopped as people recognized me and wondered why I was arriving so late to what was supposed to be a family celebration. The crowd parted as I approached the front steps, their faces showing confusion about my presence at a party I clearly wasn't expected to attend. I looked at the assembled group, Aunts and uncles who had watched me grow up, family friends who had known me since childhood, neighbors who had always been kind and welcoming. I need to share something important with all of you about why this house is dark tonight and why there's no Christmas dinner. I announced, my voice carrying clearly in the cold air. For the past 3 years, I have been paying every bill that keeps this house running. The mortgage, the utilities, the credit cards, even the country club membership. Everything you see here, from the landscaping to the furniture to the cars in the driveway, has been funded by my salary from Goldman Sachs. The silence was deafening as I opened my laptop and began displaying bank statements and payment records on the screen, tilting it so the assembled guests could see the evidence. 3 years of automatic transfers, credit card payments, and bill management appeared in clear detail. Last week, my parents informed me that I was not welcome at Christmas because of my supposed financial problems. They've been told by someone they trust that I'm struggling with gambling addiction and financial instability. Based on these lies, they decided to exclude me from the family and throw this party to celebrate their independence from me. I pulled out printed hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and photographic evidence that the private investigator had accidentally provided. What they didn't know is that this same person has been sleeping with my father and stealing money from my accounts. Yesterday, they took $35,000 from my Christmas bonus to fund their affair and their plan to frame me for financial crimes. The crowd's stunned silence was broken only by my mother's sharp intake of breath as she recognized the evidence I was displaying. Sarah, who had been standing near the back of the group trying to remain invisible, was now clearly visible as guests turned to stare at her. The woman my family invited to replace me at Christmas has been systematically destroying my reputation while stealing my money and sleeping with my father. Every comfort you see here, every luxury they enjoy, has been paid for by the son they no longer want. Sarah tried to push through the crowd toward her car, but Emma stepped in front of her, demanding answers that had been 3 years in the making. The assembled guests, people who had known our family for decades, were beginning to understand the scope of the deception they had witnessed. Uncle David, his detective instincts activated by the evidence I was presenting, took control of the situation. "Everyone needs to stop talking and start listening," he announced with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crime scenes. "Frank, you need to explain to these people how you've been lying to them about your financial situation for 3 years." But Frank's response wasn't explanation. It was violence. Humiliated in front of his entire social circle, exposed as a fraud and a thief, he lunged toward me with the rage of someone whose carefully constructed identity was crumbling in real time. David and 2 other relatives immediately restrained him, while the remaining guests watched in shock as the evening's revelations continued to unfold. The Christmas Eve that was supposed to celebrate my family's independence from me had become the night they learned exactly how dependent they had always been. Uncle David's police training took over as he assessed the chaos unfolding in front of 60 bewildered guests. With the authority that comes from 30 years of managing crisis situations, he guided everyone into the living room, where phone flashlights provided enough illumination for what he clearly recognized as an interrogation. "Everyone sit down and stay quiet while Hugo explains exactly what's been happening here," David commanded, positioning himself between Frank and me to prevent any additional violence. "I've seen financial fraud before, and this situation has all the warning signs of a complex criminal conspiracy." The assembled guests arranged themselves in a circle, their expensive party clothes looking increasingly ridiculous in the cold, dark room. Aunts and uncles who had come expecting celebration were now witnesses to the systematic destruction of our family's reputation. I methodically presented 3 years of evidence explaining how Frank's business failure had led to my secret financial support, how I had maintained their lifestyle while allowing them to believe in his fictional consulting success, and how Sarah had exploited their gratitude to turn them against me with elaborate lies. The bank statements were devastating in their clarity. month after month of transfers, payments, and credit card expenditures that painted a picture of complete financial dependence, disguised as independence. Relatives who had admired Frank's apparent business recovery were learning that everything they had witnessed was funded by his son's sacrifice. But David's most penetrating questions focused on my older brother Marcus, who had been absent from family gatherings for over 5 years. Frank had always claimed Marcus was irresponsible and had cut contact with the family because he couldn't handle adult responsibilities. David, however, remembered Marcus differently. Yes, Frank, your story about Marcus never made sense to me. That boy was responsible from the time he could walk. What really happened between you and Marcus 5 years ago? Frank's face went pale as David pressed for details about Marcus's departure from the family. Under questioning that felt more like police interrogation than family discussion, the truth began emerging in fragments. Marcus had some financial problems and we tried to help him, Frank muttered, avoiding eye contact with the assembled relatives. He became hostile when we couldn't enable his poor decisions anymore. David wasn't satisfied with evasive answers. What kind of financial problems, Frank? Be specific. It was my mother who finally broke under David's relentless questioning. Marcus co-signed some loans for us when we were having difficulties. When he couldn't pay them back, we had to protect ourselves legally. He became very aggressive and threatening, so we had to get restraining orders. The room fell silent as the pattern became clear. David reached for his phone and dialed a number from his contacts list. Marcus, it's Uncle David. I'm here with Hugo, and I think it's time you told your brother what really happened to you. David put the call on speaker and Marcus's voice filled the dark room. 5 years of silence ended as my brother began explaining the systematic financial abuse our parents had perfected long before they targeted me. They convinced me to co-sign loans and credit cards to help with temporary financial difficulties. Marcus's voice was steady but filled with old pain. Within 6 months, they had maxed out everything and destroyed my credit score. When I demanded explanations, they claimed I was the one being irresponsible. When I threatened to expose their lies, they had me arrested for harassment and got restraining orders to keep me away from family events. The assembled relatives listened in stunned silence as Marcus described losing his job, his apartment, and his savings, while our parents portrayed him as the problem. He had been forced to rebuild his life in Portland, Oregon, too traumatized by family betrayal to maintain contact with anyone. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Marcus had been trying to warn me for over a year, sending anonymous messages through various email accounts and social media platforms. I tried everything to reach out to Hugo without violating the restraining orders, Marcus explained. I sent dozens of messages warning him about the pattern, but I could never identify myself directly because they would have had me arrested again. I pulled out my phone and checked my spam folder while the family listened to Marcus's explanation. There they were. Dozens of messages I had dismissed as random harassment or spam. Messages like, "They did this to me too," and "Check your credit reports carefully," and "Don't trust family financial arrangements." Most crushing was a message from 6 months earlier. "Your girlfriend has contacted me through LinkedIn asking questions about family financial history. She's gathering intelligence for something. Be careful." I had deleted that message without reading it carefully, assuming it was a phishing attempt. If I had paid attention, I could have prevented months of manipulation and betrayal. David's final revelation completed the picture of systematic family destruction. Sarah had outstanding warrants in Chicago for financial fraud, involving a similar scheme with her previous boyfriend. She was a professional con artist who specialized in targeting successful men through family vulnerabilities. Marcus had discovered her criminal history through background searches he performed after her LinkedIn contact, but his warnings had been lost in spam filters and my own assumptions about random internet harassment. "She's done this before," Marcus explained. "Court records show she was involved in a scheme where she convinced a man's family that he was financially unstable, while she systematically stole from his accounts. When the family turned against him, she disappeared with over $60,000. The assembled guests were witnessing the exposure of a criminal enterprise that had operated for years, destroying families through psychological manipulation and financial theft. Frank and Helen had been both perpetrators and victims, abusing their children while being manipulated by a professional criminal. As David announced his intention to call the county sheriff's department to report multiple felonies, I realized this wasn't just about recovering stolen money or exposing lies. This was about understanding that I wasn't alone in experiencing this nightmare, that my brother had survived the same systematic destruction and had been trying to save me from repeating his experience. The Christmas party they had planned to celebrate their independence from me had become the night our family learned the true cost of their betrayal, not just to me, but to both of their sons. Sheriff's deputies arrived at 7:30 Christmas Eve, their patrol cars casting red and blue lights across the snow-covered lawn, while neighbors peered from windows at the unfolding drama. Detective Maria Rodriguez took charge of the scene with professional efficiency, separating witnesses, and collecting evidence while reading Frank and Sarah their rights. Sarah's arrest was swift once Detective Rodriguez ran her identification through the system. Outstanding warrants from Chicago for financial fraud and identity theft meant she would be extradited immediately after processing. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled as handcuffs clicked into place, and she was led to the patrol car, her expensive party dress looking absurd under winter coats borrowed from sympathetic guests. Frank's arrest took longer as Detective Rodriguez reviewed the evidence I had compiled. Bank records showing unauthorized access to my accounts, forged loan applications, and documentation of the private investigator's fraudulent report created a clear case for multiple felonies. The stolen Christmas bonus alone constituted grand theft, while the systematic manipulation of my parents' financial situation qualified as elder abuse in reverse. But the most satisfying moment came when my mother finally understood the scope of her manipulation. As deputies collected evidence and guests dispersed into the cold night, Helen sat on her dark living room couch and began comprehending how thoroughly she had been deceived. Frank hadn't been protecting her from financial stress. He had been using her maternal instincts as weapons against her own children. I helped destroy both my sons, she whispered to David as the reality settled over her. I believed every lie supported every cruel decision and celebrated when we hurt the people who loved us most. Emma's breakdown was more dramatic but equally transformative. My 26-year-old sister had been Frank's most enthusiastic accomplice, eagerly sharing Sarah's poison about my supposed problems and celebrating my exclusion from family events. Now she understood that her brother had been sacrificing his own future to preserve her comfort while she participated in his psychological torture. The immediate crisis required practical solutions. While my parents faced legal consequences for their actions, the house still needed heat and electricity to be habitable during winter. I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I would restore essential utilities, but only to protect Helen and Emma during the coldest months of the year. I'll pay for heat, electricity, and water through March, I announced to David and the remaining family members, but the mortgage payments, credit cards, and luxury expenses end permanently. This house will be sold, and everyone needs to find ways to support themselves. The transformation in family dynamics was immediate and dramatic. Helen, who had been a homemaker for 30 years, applied for positions at local schools and retail stores. Emma, who had been working part-time while living at home, suddenly needed full-time employment to contribute to household expenses. Most importantly, I called Marcus from the police station while giving my statement to Detective Rodriguez. 5 years of separation ended with a conversation that lasted until dawn on Christmas morning. "I'm driving from Portland immediately," Marcus said when I explained the night's events. "I should be there by tomorrow afternoon." "Marcus, you don't have to do that. I know this family hurt you badly." "Hugo, you're not this family. You're my brother, and I should have tried harder to protect you from what I knew was coming. Marcus arrived at my Manhattan apartment at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning, carrying a single duffel bag and 5 years of accumulated wisdom about healing from family betrayal. We spent the next 6 hours talking through everything: his experience with Frank's manipulation, his struggle to rebuild after financial destruction, his therapy process, and his gradual acceptance that some family relationships cannot be salvaged. The hardest part, Marcus explained while we shared coffee as sunrise broke over the city, was realizing that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their abuse. Frank and Helen taught us that family loyalty means enduring any treatment they choose to give us. Learning to set boundaries felt like betrayal at first. Over the following weeks, the legal process moved forward with satisfying efficiency. Sarah's extradition to Chicago revealed a pattern of financial fraud spanning multiple states and victims. Frank's guilty plea to theft and fraud charges resulted in a suspended sentence contingent on making full restitution, money he didn't have and would need years to earn. But the most meaningful transformation was personal rather than legal. Marcus and I became partners in rebuilding our relationship while maintaining healthy boundaries with our parents. He moved back to New York in February and started a financial consulting business helping families recover from financial abuse. Our shared experience became the foundation for helping other victims identify and escape similar situations. The consulting practice grew rapidly as we discovered that financial family abuse was far more common than anyone realized. Adult children being exploited by parents, spouses stealing from partners, relatives manipulating vulnerable family members. The patterns were everywhere once we learned to recognize them. Helen's evolution was slower, but genuine. Working as a school secretary forced her to interact with functional families and observe healthy parent-child relationships for the first time in years. Therapy helped her understand how Frank had manipulated her protective instincts against her children, turning her love into a weapon for his schemes. Emma's transformation was more dramatic. Forced to support herself financially for the first time in her life, she discovered capabilities and independence she had never been allowed to develop. Her engagement to Jake, a teacher who appreciated her newfound maturity, represented her commitment to building relationships based on mutual respect, rather than financial dependence. The house in Westchester sold in April for enough money to pay off the remaining mortgage and cover Frank's restitution obligations. Helen moved into a modest apartment near her job and began building a life based on her own resources rather than her children's sacrifice. Christmas the following year looked completely different. Marcus and I hosted dinner in my Manhattan apartment, which I had expanded into a 2-bedroom to accommodate his frequent visits. Helen joined us, bringing homemade cookies and stories about her students. Emma came with Jake, proudly contributing wine from her first paycheck as a marketing coordinator. The celebration was simple but genuine. No expensive catering, no elaborate decorations, no pretense of wealth or status. Just family members who had learned to value honesty over appearance, independence over dependence, and respect over manipulation. Frank was not invited and had not been in contact with any of us since his release from jail. His attempts to rebuild relationships were consistently rejected as we maintained the boundaries necessary for our healing. As we sat around my dining room table sharing stories and enjoying each other's company without the shadow of financial secrecy or emotional manipulation, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. I learned that love isn't about what you can provide for others, but about who stands with you when everything falls apart. I said during our evening conversation, real family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to enable their worst impulses. True strength isn't in how much you can carry for others, but in knowing when to put the burden down and let them learn to carry themselves. Marcus raised his glass in agreement. The best part is understanding that we broke the cycle. Frank's manipulation stops with our generation. The evening concluded with Marcus showing us his latest project, a website and resource center for families experiencing financial abuse. We had turned our painful experience into a tool for helping others recognize and escape similar situations. As our guests prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from a stranger. My brother found your article online about financial family abuse. I think my parents are doing this to me too. Can you help? I showed the message to Marcus, and we both smiled. Our painful Christmas Eve revelation had become our purpose, transforming personal trauma into public service. Have you ever found yourself questioning whether your generosity is being taken for granted by people who claim to love you? Sometimes the people closest to us can exploit our kindness while convincing themselves they're the victims in the relationship. I'd love to hear your thoughts about setting boundaries with family members who cross the line between accepting help and demanding sacrifice. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with anyone who might benefit from understanding these manipulation tactics, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding authentic relationships. Your support helps us reach people who might be struggling with similar situations and need to know they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that values honesty, respect, and genuine connection. I hope your holidays are filled with people who appreciate your true worth rather than what you can provide for them. Remember that real love never requires you to sacrifice your dignity or your future for someone else's comfort.